What's up, guys? This is Matt Day, and this is episode 2 of Archives. What do you guys think of intro music on the show? Thought maybe we would dial things in a little bit more, give it a little bit more of a polished kind of feel. And it's not very polished video-wise today. This is the last video, I think, that you guys are going to see me record in this office space. I'm getting ready, actually, as soon as I'm done recording this, I'm going to start the process of moving to a new office space, which kind of came out of nowhere. It wasn't something I was really planning for, but an opportunity kind of popped up, and I'm going to take it. I'm very excited about it. It's only like 2.5 blocks from here, really, but very, very excited. But it's kind of bittersweet, you know. I've been in this space for maybe 9 months or so, roughly, and I've really grown to love it, but it's time for a new chapter, a new place. So I'm going to start moving over there as soon as I'm done with this, and you guys will see plenty of, updates on that on both YouTube and social media, Instagram, places like that. But yeah, this is going to be the last video I make here in this space. So I'm happy to have Archives be kind of the sign-off on this space. One other thing I want to mention right at the top is the ads on the YouTube videos. So if you watch this podcast on YouTube and you don't consume it through, audio only, you probably got interrupted by a ton of ads last week on the first episode. I was unaware that YouTube throws that many ads into longer form content, so my apologies for that. I have gone back and changed that up so you're not getting interrupted, every 2 minutes with an ad. So that is my job. That's how I pay the bills with my YouTube channel. But I'm not going to hit you guys with literally I think there were 10 ads in a half-hour podcast or whatever. So apologies for that. You're not going to have to endure that anymore, just so you know. Yeah, I'm really excited about this show, though. I appreciate you guys, showing the support for the podcast. I had a lot of people reach out over the last week or so, talking about, when they listened to the show or how they enjoyed watching it and everything. Obviously, plenty of comments on the YouTube video, but a lot of you reached out via, DMs and emails and stuff like that. So just wanted to say thank you. This is going to be a pretty good one. I've got a lot of questions here. I wanted to kind of open up the show a little bit different rather than just jumping right into questions. I figured I would just kind of talk about, some things that are, I guess, just on my mind. One thing that I've just been thinking about over the last week is how cool it is that we get to watch other photographers that we admire, in real time. We get to follow along their career, even if it's not a photographer that is doing it for a living, or maybe it's just a friend of yours that, they just do this as a hobby, a little thing on the side, and they don't really share it with that many people. Maybe they have a small Instagram account or something. It's just really cool to be able to watch the progression and the path that people take with photography. Normally, you wouldn't be able to really follow along, and that's, the whole idea of followers and things like that. People kind of chalk it up to just really shallow numbers, that kind of thing. But it's really cool. There are a lot of photographers that are well-known and other photographers that aren't really well-known at all. But they're people that I just enjoy their work, and I get to just see how they evolve as a photographer and new projects and just new places they go because of photography. It's just really cool. So I know social media gets a bad rep for stuff like that, but it's really cool how close it's brought a lot of different photographers together. So just wanted to open up the show with a positive note. You know what I'm saying? Let's jump into the first question. Christian Castillo, another person who I've become friends with over the years just because of social media. So that's really cool to see. He asked, what's the point to a photograph anymore? Which is an interesting question. I think so much of this is really subjective, and it's going to be really up to each photographer to kind of find their own purpose for photography and give photography their own purpose. It's really going to come down to the person, but I think that's what's great about it because, some people, they want to make art with their photography and they want things to be really conceptual and it's completely open to interpretation and it's a thing that you experience, whereas other people just want to make pretty pictures, they want to take photos of sunsets and things like that, and that's great too. People can use it as like a political tool, to inform people about things that, they feel strongly about. People use it to just document their life, everyday life and what's going on around them, to have a record of the life that they lived, when they're in their last few minutes. They'll have a long record of a life that they lived. There are so many different ways that people can use photography, and I think the point of a photograph is really going to come down to each person. So for me, it's very much about having a document and a record of my life, but through strange circumstances, it's also how I make a living, both shooting for clients and also just talking about the process and the passion for it here on YouTube and podcasts and anywhere else. So the point of a photograph is really going to come down to the person. For me, it's all about having a record. Josh Cheney, another person who I know through social media, actually shot this guy's senior portraits when he was graduating high school, which is just really cool. The fact that, he's a great photographer and someone that, I've bought zines of his and we met because he was graduating high school and needed some senior portraits. He says, how do you feel about sharing work from a long-term project online before the project is released and finished? This is another really great question. This is something that was on my mind and something that I spoke about a lot when I released Social Distancing, because that was something that nobody had seen any of the photos until the zine was already laid out and ready to order. And I think moving forward, that's how I would like to work for my own projects, just because it takes away any possibility of my view on those photos being influenced by likes and shares and comments and that kind of stuff. I can look at things really a little bit more objectively and kind of true to how I actually feel about it. And at the same time, I can always send the work to people for feedback from people that I actually want feedback from. I can have friends and colleagues who I trust and I value their input. I can send the work to them to get that kind of, feedback when I need it. It's not just anonymous people online where I have no idea, how to take their input. So for me personally, I think it's a really healthy thing to kind of keep the work to yourself and not just throw it all out there, because at the same time, when you actually do release something and people purchase it, they're experiencing some of those photos for the very first time. Maybe sharing a few photos here and there, that's really not going to hurt anything. I also think a lot of the strength of a book or a zine is flipping through it and seeing, what order you're seeing those photos and, the photos that are paired together and how they play off of one another and how two photos combined can create an entire different meaning that you may not have had with just an individual photo. So that's kind of how I feel about it. Obviously, it's all subjective, like so much of photography and art, but that's kind of how I feel about it. Linus and his camera. I'm sure you guys know all about Linus, film photographer, has a great YouTube channel, also has his own film lab now that he's running, which is just, I can't imagine the work that he's putting in and the exhaustion that he's feeling. Linus, hang in there. You're doing a good thing. It's rad to see what you're doing for the film community and just watch it grow and everything. So keep it up, man. But he asks a very important question, and that is, what's your favorite hat? I'm a hat guy. I've always worn hats all the time. Lately, I have not been wearing hats as much. I'm growing my hair back out, and the locks have been flowing. Normally, I've always worn like a typical flat billed trucker hat. I've always loved the way that looks, probably just through skateboarding. I've been wearing that kind of hat for like 15 years now. But here in the past maybe 6 months or so, I've been wearing these like 5-panel hats that Roast Coffee has. And I'm normally not a 5-panel hat kind of guy. I think my head is much too large for a smaller style hat like that, but I think I've gotten used to it. I've just forced myself to get used to it. So I wore that hat a lot. If you've ever seen a video where I wear a hat that has an R on the front of it, that's from Roast Coffee. You can buy that hat at roastcoffee.com. Not sponsored, but I get questions about that hat all of the time. So yeah, right now I would say that hat, but I haven't been wearing hats as much. And when I do, it hasn't been the trucker hat that I've kind of always worn. So I don't know. I'm getting 30, or I'm turning 30 this year, so maybe I'm getting old. Maybe that's it. But yeah, right now, no hat. I'm just going full Teen Wolf. Anthony Finn Photo says, what is your opinion of making color film black and white after the capture? Should a specific frame ask for it? Better to honor the frame or honor the film you shot on? Really enjoying this archiving questions format. Thanks. Thank you, Anthony. I appreciate that. I have converted plenty of film photos that were shot on color to black and white after the fact because it just works better. Mostly this is like portraits. Normally, if I'm just out kind of shooting random scenes and walking around with my camera, I'm shooting black and white with intention and I'm shooting color with intention. But if I'm shooting portraits of somebody, there are plenty of times where I think, man, this would just look great in black and white and color, and I have no issue converting the photo. So I think it's not something that you can do to any photo because some photos that work really well in color are just not going to work the same way as they do in black and white. I did a whole video about shooting black and white with intention just a few weeks ago. You can check that out on the channel. However, if this is more of like a moral question and you're asking, is it wrong to do that? I don't think so at all. I know some people might cringe at the idea of a Portra 400 photo being converted to black and white, but it's about the photo itself and you know the impact it has. So if you're going to get a stronger photo out of converting it to black and white, I say do it, man. I'm not your dad. You can do whatever you want. Unless Elliot or Nora are listening to this in the future, then that's a different story. Let's see. X.ad says, favorite rap album? I appreciate this question. I like the kind of off-the-topic kind of questions that I've gotten lately. Favorite rap album? I don't know about like my all-time favorite. When I was maybe like 14, 15, I listened to a lot of Notorious B.I.G., Ready to Die. I could probably recite like that whole record front to back, which might surprise a lot of people. Here lately, though, Logic's new record just came out, and it's like his final album. Dad Bod is is a track that I can really relate to. I love that. But I love a lot of Logic's albums. But really, Run the Jewels 4, all of Run the Jewels records are great, but we have been consistently listening to Run the Jewels 4 well, since it came out, so all summer basically. Elliot as well is a big fan of Run the Jewels, so that's a good one that, you know, it's good for the whole family. Rick Marquez says, what's one piece of gear you regret ever buying? Man, I don't know if I necessarily have gear that like I regret buying. There were just gear purchases that I've made that I didn't use it as much as I thought I would, or I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would. The classic example I always bring up is the Contax T2. Part of me kind of wishes I kept the camera because I would have made a lot of money. I bought it. It was still in the box, mint condition, and I think I paid $375 after shipping. Nowadays, you can't even buy a broken one for that price, probably. It's kind of insane. I wish I would have kept that camera just so I could sell it later for a much higher price, but it was just a camera that just didn't click with me. I have a long history of having bad luck with point-and-shoot cameras and their autofocus. I didn't really have that many issues with that camera. I never really felt like going out and shooting with it, and if I was in a place where I could have used it, I likely had my M6 as well, and I would just naturally grab the M6 over the T2. So that was one that I didn't really regret buying it. I was really excited to get it because it had this kind of cult following, and this was back in 2013. Now, like I said, it's an even bigger cult following, and the price reflects that, but just didn't really click with that one. Let's see. Apalma Maso. I am so bad at names. I am so sorry. Why YouTubers always talk of overexposing as a good practice or tip and don't talk about getting a correct exposure with stock film ISO? It's a really good question because I think this is one of the easily kind of not misunderstood, but it's just something that people don't really talk about because you just see people saying just overexpose it, which is something you can do. It doesn't mean you should do it. I think the reason that so many people talk about that is because for beginners, overexposing the film is going to give you a little bit of a margin for error. So if you're underexposing Portra 400 by a couple of stops, you're probably going to be totally fine. That film has crazy latitude even with underexposure, but especially with kind of your more budget options, film stocks that don't have as much latitude, it's much easier to basically lose quality and lose information when you underexpose as opposed to overexpose. So I think a lot of people recommend overexposing just as a good rule of thumb. That way you can be a little bit more worry-free, when you're out there shooting, if this is new to you. Obviously, getting a correct exposure is not only a good thing to do for the sake of the final photo, but knowing how to get correct exposure and getting it consistently is just a good way to kind of train your eye to see light and see value of light so that you don't have to, take a meter out every single photo. A lot of times you can just kind of meter by eye, and from experience and doing it for a really long time, you're going to be able to kind of know where your exposure is, give a stop or take, under or over. It's just a good way to kind of build that practice. But I think that's why you see a lot of people recommending it, is just because for beginners, it's a really easy way to kind of take away some of that stress and give yourself a little bit of that margin for error. Chris Colvin says, how long was the time between you deciding to make a career out of photography and you realizing you were there? This is a really interesting kind of question in terms of the way they phrased it, realizing you were there. That's something that I think a lot of people can relate to with photography, but really just about anything. I personally, the first time I read this question, I immediately thought of YouTube, because when you start YouTube, you just think, man, if I can get to 10,000 subscribers, that's like a threshold that people kind of automatically think. If you hit 10K, that's big. And then immediately after that, it's like, okay, I'll try to get to 20K or 30K or 50K, whatever it may be. And then inevitably 100,000. I hit 100,000 last year in December, I think. And that was like a goal of mine. And it felt like as soon as I hit 100,000, and YouTube, they celebrate it with the plaque that they send you and all of that, it felt like that's when I'll make it. That's when I'll really be like a YouTuber, you know what I mean? Which is something that I never set out to do. It's just kind of, it evolved and I kind of fell into it, but it was still like a milestone that I really wanted to hit. And then I hit it and it was just kind of like, okay, well now what, and obviously you think, okay, well, when can I hit 200K? How long did it take me to get from this point to that point? And it's a weird thing because you build up this idea in your mind, and I think a lot of people probably do with photography as well, where it's like, I want to be an established photographer and I want this to be my career, and I want to get to a certain point where it's just what I'm known for, and that's, that's everything for me. And you kind of build up this idea of how it might be and how people will perceive it, and I don't know. I know that I felt that way early on, like, oh, I want to be a photographer, like legitimate professional photographer. But there was never anything for me that really solidified that for me. I thought maybe when I get a studio, that's when I'll be, that's when it'll be it for me. And like 10 years ago, I had a studio downtown in Chillicothe, and I did it, and it was cool, but that wasn't really it, you know. And then I thought, well, maybe if I get things published in a magazine, didn't really change anything for me. You know, making a certain amount of money each year just through photography, numbers that I didn't really think would even be possible. Do it, and then it doesn't really change anything. I think it's healthy to kind of keep that kind of stuff in check, because if you're doing it right now, you're there. You're like that's it. You know, if we're talking about making a career out of it, obviously if it's sustainable and it's paying your bills, then you're there. You know, but it's really easy to kind of build it up into your mind and you know, imagine that it's going to be this grand thing, and all of a sudden you've made it and it's smooth sailing from there. I can promise you that the second you get to that destination or that milestone or whatever it may be, you're automatically going to start thinking about the next thing, which I think is good because it continues to push you forward. But at the same time, it's dangerous to kind of let that be the driving force behind it, because if you are just reaching for that specific milestone or that feeling, you're never going to be satisfied, because you're just always going to be moving on to the next thing. But from a more practical kind of standpoint, we kind of went off on a tangent there. But I think it is important to talk about that kind of stuff. But from a more like practical business standpoint, making this your career, if the work is there, the demand is there, and it's paying your bills, then absolutely keep doing it. There are going to be a lot of ups and downs with photography as a career, because it's not something that you're guaranteed a paycheck every week, you know, unless you're commissioned by, you know, maybe like a marketing agency and they are paying you X amount each week to shoot a certain amount of things and there are contracts involved. Then yeah, you have a little bit more of a structured kind of setup. But if you're just your typical freelance photographer or videographer or graphic designer, you're going to have great months and bad months, and you're going to question if it's really the right move at all. That's something that I think anybody, you know, can vouch for. That's something that I've personally dealt with for a million different reasons and a million different times over the years. But if the work is there, if people are asking for the work and it's paying the bills, then you're by all means, you're there. Let's see. NP Jensen Film. Apart from 35mm, what is your favorite focal length? And if given the choice, would you go for a wide angle, like say 12mm, or a zoom lens, like say 200mm or more? I would, going crazy wide or crazy telephoto, I'd have to go crazy wide, because so much of what I shoot is just everyday life and with my kids. And if I tried to shoot photos of my kids with a 200mm, I might as well just sell my camera, because that wouldn't work. Apart from 35mm, though, my favorite focal length would have to be 50mm, just because I think it is just, maybe not just as versatile as a 35, but it's pretty damn close. 35, I think, gives me enough room to include a lot of the scene wherever I am. 50mm, you're compressing things just a tiny bit more, and you're working with a little bit of a tighter frame. But for portraits, 50mm is crazy versatile. That was like my only lens for many, many years. It actually wasn't until I got my M6 in 2013 that I bought a 35mm prime lens. Before that, all of my primes were always 50mm or occasionally an 85mm for certain portrait shoots. But if I was just going to walk around with my camera, it was 50mm all day. I mean, there were, oh my gosh, let me think. How many years would that have been? 10? Maybe 10 years? 9 or 10 years I spent really focusing on 50mm. So it's a really, really versatile lens, but once I got a 35 and gave myself just a little bit more room, that kind of changed for me and a light bulb went off. But yeah, I'd have to say 50mm. Brandon Saul says, best way to sell photo prints passively. I'm a father of 3 with a full-time job, but would still like to share my work. totally get that. That is a good idea for sure, to have a way to set things up passively, because I know what it's like as a parent to not only be working full time, but also having a family full time. So being able to do things passively is huge. I would recommend places like Darkroom Tech. I personally use them. They're not a sponsor or anything. I'm not affiliated with them, obviously, but I use their service for selling prints passively because it just takes away all of the time it would take me to print the photo, package it up, ship it off, pay for the shipping, run to the post office, all of that kind of thing. It just simplifies the process, and you can adjust your own markup however much you want to make. So if you want to make the print really, really affordable and just make a tiny bit, that's fine. Or if you want to do like a limited print run, and set your actual stock and, up the price because of that, you're going to make more per print sale. And Darkroom, they have their prices kind of locked in terms of what it's going to cost them to print and ship everything. It's up to you to decide the value of the photo and things like that. So Darkroom Tech, I'm sure there are plenty of other options out there, but that's who I use, so that's the only one I can really recommend because I don't have experience using other places like that. Bowen's Photography. I am photographing this guy's wedding later this year. Super excited for it. He says, you're a photographer, you skateboard, where are the fisheye photos? Yeah, that's a good point. I could never afford a fisheye lens, so I never actually had one for my stills camera. I had a tiny little fisheye attachment that I would screw onto the front of my little high-8 video camera that I would shoot all of my skate videos with. So used one of those little cheap, I probably got them for, oh man, I don't even remember, maybe 30 or 40 bucks off of eBay back in like 2005, 2006. And would attach that to my mini DV and my high-8 cameras. But I don't really have any fisheye photos, which is odd. But I don't know. I kind of appreciate that I didn't, because so many of the photos that I shot of skateboarding when I was younger were all made with a 50mm lens. And so I learned a lot about composition and layering things because I had to make sure the trick was lined up properly and layered properly so you could, clearly see it. I wish I had time to go out and shoot a bunch of skate photos now. I don't know. Maybe I did a couple years ago. I did a little video. Me and my buddy Jordan, we went out on a little mission and shot some photos, some skate photos out at this big lake. But I don't know. I'd like to do that again sometime. It's been a while. Let's see. Rocio Nurina Photography. I am so sorry. I'm sure I'm butchering that. Are you working on any project involving your mom? Blessings to her. Thank you very, very much for asking that. I'm not working on any project with my mom right now. For those who don't know, my mom has stage 4 cancer. The cancer returned earlier this year, which was something, she was in remission late last fall, and we were obviously hoping for a much longer gap, if her cancer were to return before it did. Came back a lot sooner than we had hoped, and it is pretty aggressive, which is obviously something we're all struggling with, and naturally one of my first thoughts was, how can I make something beautiful out of this, a really unfortunate situation. But of course I have a lot of reservations about that because I don't know truly. I'm sure my mom would be okay with it. I don't know how truly she would be okay with it, and there's part of me that is hesitant to even put her in that position. I don't know. I would really like to, because obviously that's just how I see things, and it's how I kind of process things. I made photos at my dad's funeral and in the hospital right before he passed away, and I didn't look at those photos for a really, really long time. He passed away about 3.5 years ago, which does not seem like it's been that long. And it's just, I'm glad I took the photos for sure, because now I can look back on them and feel much better about them. At the time, I knew I needed to make the photos for myself, but I didn't want to look at them, so I didn't look at them for a really long time. With my mom, so much is kind of up in the air. She actually goes back for a scan later this week. The doctor feels there was like a nodule kind of, I think like roughly around the collarbone area. And her doctor says that he feels, like physically feels like it has gotten smaller since she has started treatment about 4 months ago, which is obviously a great thing. You know, their main goal was for this new treatment to, I guess, just stop the spread of the cancer. The way he feels everything, he said it feels like it's actually gotten smaller, which is a great thing, but we don't know for sure until she has a new scan done, which she has done later this week. And then we'll get the results a couple days after that. Really, really hoping for good news there. I think that will definitely dictate what comes next in terms of if I do decide to make photos of her and kind of as she's going through this, as our whole family's going through this. I'm very big on, documenting your life, and that includes the good and the bad. But it's all still just very raw right now. So, we're not sure exactly what's going to happen, but I appreciate the question and the blessings. Thank you for that. I will keep you guys posted, though, on that, because if so, that would be a big part of why I would shoot the work, not only for myself, but to share for other people who are going through a similar thing, whether it's them personally or a family member. It's very, very tough on an entire family, and any way that I can share what my family goes through in hopes that it can, comfort or just give any kind of, really just anything, any kind of comfort to another person, then I'm all for that. Jason Reinhold says, I know that you appreciate photo books a lot for the tactile and slower experience of photographs. On a similar note, could you share any experiences of seeing photo exhibitions or gallery shows and how you felt about them? How is that different, better, or worse than books? And would you ever, or have you ever had your own show? I have had my own show at a local gallery here in Chillicothe years ago. I would absolutely love to do another one again at some point. It's not something that I've been like actively seeking out, and I've been just so busy working on other things that taking the time for a gallery show would be a whole, other beast to take on. In terms of actually experiencing, though, that is one thing I love about photo books is the experience of consuming a photo book. And a couple of years ago, I think it was 2018, Molly and I went to Washington, D.C. for our anniversary in May, specifically to go see the Gaslight Anthem live, which was incredible. But while we were there, we had no idea, but there was a Sally Mann exhibition, 1,000 Crossings, in Washington, D.C. at the time. And we got to see that, and I got to see a ton of her work in person, big, small, up close. Like, it was definitely a very different experience from what I'm used to just flipping through a book. I don't go to gallery shows or anything like that often, just due to the availability of them around me in my area. But it was one thing that just made me really wish that I lived in a bigger city just for that alone, because seeing those kind of photos that big and up close, and it's just a totally different experience. So I wouldn't say that it's, better or worse than books. It's just a different way to experience photos. If you live in an area where there are regular gallery shows, whether it's from other local artists or if it's from, established photographers like Sally Mann, definitely take the time and support those places and go and see those shows, because if you're around it and you don't experience it, you're taking that for granted. Let's see. Turkolakimo. I hope I pronounced that right. Thoughts on licorice? I chose this question because it made me think of my dad, because I do not like licorice at all. But my dad was the candy man. He always had, as a matter of fact, I bet I have, these little, what are these even called? Bob's Sweet Stripes Soft Peppermint Candy. They're just these little soft peppermint candies that are, they're soft. They dissolve really quickly. My dad always had a pocket full of these. As a result of that, everyone in our family, we kind of always have these on hand. So I keep some here in my desk at the office. My dad loved any kind of candy. As a matter of fact, at his funeral, there was a bucket of those mints set out as people were coming through for the viewing. Because anytime my dad ran into anybody he knew, he'd reach into his pocket and give him a couple of mints. That was just something he did. But aside from the mints, he also loved a bunch of terrible candy. One of those being licorice. He loved black licorice. He loved those Necco wafers, Good and Plenty's, all kinds of stuff that as a kid, circus peanuts, like as a kid, I remember he would, anytime we'd stop at a gas station, he would always go in and get candy. And it would be, to me as a kid, not what candy is supposed to taste like. So I had to include that in there just because, my dad. But yeah, thoughts on licorice? I'm not a fan. Can't say that I am. Let's see. Dan Regalato Photography, have you ever considered using your work as part of advocacy program for autism awareness? And how has your photography helped you relate and understand Nora through the years? I love this question. My daughter Nora is 5. She is on the autism spectrum, and pursuing any kind of project about autism has been on my mind for the last few years since we got her official diagnosis, because Nora is unlike any other kid I've ever met, and any other person on the spectrum. I think you could say the same thing. They are truly the most unique and their own kind of people. And I can't even explain to really do it justice, but you will never meet a person like my daughter Nora. And watching her and photographing her over the years and watching what it is that she's drawn to, how she processes things, and how she just lives her life and what she sees, and it's just fascinating. And I've really been able to kind of look at things a little bit differently and appreciate things a little bit differently. It's made me slow down quite a bit in terms of what I look for in a photo and what catches my eye, because something that we might walk by or something that might be in our house every single day, we don't think anything of it, but to Nora, she'll notice it and she'll gravitate towards things. Pursuing a project I would love to be able to do just for the sake of, again, spreading awareness and, acceptance. At the same time, I don't know where to begin, because there is something so special about people with autism that I want to do it justice, and I want to show them in the light that they give off. Nora has something about her that everyone just gravitates towards Nora. All of her therapists, people at school, they love Nora. There's just something special about her. And I know that other people on the spectrum have their own unique and beautiful thing about them that nobody else has, that it's entirely theirs. And I really want to try and photograph, a number of different people in the spectrum and really show them like in their space, in their world. And that's not going to be an easy thing to do. And I don't know the legalities of, what that would all look like in terms of like publishing the work, sharing the work. I would obviously have to reach out to people. People would have to be willing to let me come into their house and photograph them. But it is something that I really want to do. It's something that I will do at some point. Because there's something about people on the autism spectrum that other people need to see for themselves, if they haven't already, and not for the sake of, oh, look, this is different, but these are people just like the rest of us, and I want to really push that kind of awareness and, more than anything, acceptance, for the sake of, the future, my daughter's future. So that's definitely something that, will happen at some point. G.R. Jones says, not a question, but from one dude in small town Appalachia to another, thanks for the inspiration and keep on keeping on. I had to include this because this one hit home for me for sure. Living in a small town in Appalachian, Ohio, pursuing any kind of creative field is not something that is often recommended. It's not something that people really talk about, let alone recommended. And I wanted to bring this up to kind of share a story. I've shared this story before on other podcasts that I was like a guest on, or probably in a YouTube video at some point. When I was in high school, I decided like, okay, I've been doing photography for several years now. I really love this more than anything. This just feels like what I need to be doing. I'm going to be a photographer. That's just what my job is going to be. Before that, I wanted to be a teacher, just because, I enjoy working with people and I enjoy helping people learn things and understand things. And it's funny now that YouTube and like mentorship programs that I've done, it's kind of scratched that itch for me. But I really decided like photography, I needed to do something with photography. And our senior year, the entire senior class had to give a presentation on what their career was going to be and what steps they were going to take to make that happen. And, mine was about photography. And we would give these presentations in front of the entire senior class. So all of the people that I've, been going to school with since kindergarten and up, as well as teachers. There were a few like senior advisors. I'm pretty sure there were a few there. My guidance counselor, the person who was giving me guidance on my future after senior year. I'm not going to say any names or anything, but I believe they were also one of like the senior advisors as well. But at the very least, they were the guidance counselor. And he asked me, I gave my presentation and, talked about what I wanted to do, the kind of stuff I wanted to shoot, and how I planned on staying in Chillicothe, Ohio. And at the end of it, I asked if there were any questions, and this guy raised his hand and he said, "How much does a photographer make in a year? What's their yearly salary?" And I'm like, well, it's really going to depend on what they charge and how much work they're taking in. It's not something that is, guaranteed. It's just, it depends on the person. And he was like, "Yeah, I think you're going to need to come up with a better plan than that. I don't think photography is going to work out for you, not in this area." And I remember hearing that, and it was like, probably from my skateboarding background, this kind of DIY punk rock kind of attitude that I remember hearing that and just thinking, okay, I'll take that bet, I'll make sure it works then. Just for you saying that and saying it in front of everybody here that's watching, I'll go ahead and make sure that works then. And that honestly, as much of a, and looking back now, I'm sure it would be I was just saying that to really, to drive you, give you a little push, I know it was not meant that way. I can go into a lot of other examples for how I know specifically it wasn't that way, but it wasn't that way. But I did take it as a way of, okay, then I'm going to prove you wrong. And for anybody listening that is in a similar situation, if people are doubting you and telling you that you need to come up with a safer plan, and, well, I know that'd be great, but you ought to just, settle for something else that's a little bit more stable. Yes, you're not going to enjoy it, but that's life. As my dad would say, piss on that. I firmly believe that you need to pursue whatever it is that you want to pursue. If it's just for, a hobby, if it's something you want to make your career, whatever it is, don't let other people tell you how you should live your life and what path you should take, because you have one life and that is it. And you need to make sure that you are fulfilled 100%. Photography as a career in this area, no, it was not easy at all. It continues to be something that goes up and down. We talked about that earlier in this episode, but I would take all of the bad times and slow work seasons and, low bank account over, punching in and doing a job that I hated every single day. So if you absolutely want to do it, you need to do it. So, yeah. That's what we're going to end on today. G.R. Jones, you didn't mention where you are in small town Appalachia, but yeah, I can relate, man. So keep doing what you're doing and keep pushing forward. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Archives, though. I really appreciate you guys tuning in and sticking with me on everything. And yeah, it feels weird with this being the last thing that I record in this office space. After I get done recording this, I'm going to start boxing stuff up and moving stuff over to the new place. And Yeah, it's weird. I'm really excited for it though, but I appreciate you guys sticking with me, and hope the audio sounds all right. Last week I had a different mic and a different setup. Now I'm working with this. Next week we're going to be in a different place, and I've got intro music now. I used to be so particular about everything has to be dialed in and set in stone before I start a project. And now we're just we're flying by the seat of our pants. I don't even know what that phrase even means or where it gets its origin. If you do know, send me a message on Instagram. We can talk about it. That is it for today on Archives. Thank you guys for listening and tuning in. I hope you enjoy this episode. I hope you enjoy next week's episode. Do I play the outro music? I guess I can kind of fade it in. Yeah, there we go. I don't know if this is the right way to go about it. Thank you guys for listening to Archives. Hope you all have a great week. I'll see you guys next time.